Ready to apply for a job in localization but not sure if you meet all the qualifications? Hear from 6 hiring managers on whether it's necessary to match every criteria.
I would say definitely yes. Be bold and apply even if you don't meet some of the criteria. And I think that's for at least 2 main reasons. So first of all, I think the hiring managers are not like deadly serious about all the qualifications and requirements for a given role. So I think if there is at least some alignment, if they see a potential in a certain application, I think they can be flexible. They can hire the candidate and they can let them grow into the role. So I think the chances are high that you may be successful even if your application doesn't really tick all the boxes. I, for example, prefer hiring for attitude rather than for extensive experience or formal qualifications. And I think if you are curious and passionate about something, then probably it means that you can learn rest of the things that you need as you go.
If you meet, 50+% of the requirements, I think you'd be in a pretty good spot. If you're not sure, I would apply, right? If you're not sure if it's sufficient, because I've screened a lot of resumes and I've interviewed a lot of people over the last 15, 20, 25 years. And if I look at who we ended up hiring, maybe they checked half the boxes, maybe not.
Yes, and always yes. Apply even if you don't meet every single criteria. It's like when you imagine, you're 5 years old and you imagine the ideal wedding or you imagine the ideal partner, right? You do want them to tick off a lot of boxes, but nobody's like quote unquote perfect. And number one, number two, a lot of these job descriptions are written by people that are copying off other job descriptions. These are HR people that don't really know what to actually expect of a candidate, what's going to be valuable. So if you can get your foot in the door, then you need to charm them during the interview. But what's important is trying to, yes, match as many of the requirements as possible, highlight why those are very important, and also highlight how you plan to overcome the gaps that you have, of course. Like maybe you don't know the tool that they're using, but you've used very similar tools and they're comparable. It's like, I've never used Google Docs, but I've used Word. So I probably know, I would probably figure it out pretty quickly. So it's a matter of like setting yourself up for success.
You should definitely apply even if you don't match any of the criteria. That would be my bottom line. Because on the one hand, when you define a job profile with requirements, it's for a reason. There's a lot at stake, obviously, when you're recruiting. It's damn expensive to make a bad recruitment. So, for instance, for linguist positions, in regard of the ISO standard framework, you need to prove the qualifications of the linguist. On the other hand, maybe you're not a fit for that position you're applying for, but your profile will catch the eye of the recruiter and you will be offered something else. My advice is don't assume anything, ever, period, in life. Don't assume. Just go for it. Worst case, it's not going to work.
Yes, of course, they should apply, even if they don't match all the criteria, and especially for entry-level positions. So it is not very likely for a candidate to match all the criteria. And an ideal candidate would be someone who should be able to grow with the role. So rather than who are presenting all the skills and experience. So I think it is important to present in the resume that the interviews that how you developed your existing skills and competencies and how eager you are to grow.
I would say if you're interested in a job and you do have experience for that particular job, even if you don't check off all the requirements, apply. The way I look at resumes, yes, the experience is the big one. If I see that you have worked at different language service provider companies or on the client side within the language sector, I would definitely want to talk to you. And oftentimes the companies you joined have their own training. So even if you don't check all the boxes, you would be trained on the tools you might not be familiar with or the process in the given companies. So I wouldn't discourage you to not apply if you are interested. to me, the passion is 90% of the success, and everything else you can learn. So if you are really excited about the role and you are willing to learn as you go, then I would say definitely apply.
And then I think the second reason is even more important to me. And that is that, practice makes perfect. And I think applying to job adverts and taking part in the recruitment process, that's an art in itself. And I think if you do it frequently, you get used to the process. You know more or less what questions to expect in the next interview you're gonna have. And I think you can also learn how to manage stress that is hard to avoid during interviews. So I think if you practice a lot, I think even if you are not successful at first, probably that just means that you can handle any future interviews even better.
Let's say it's a position for a DTP specialist in localization. You would want them to have a good foundation with some of the tools. So if it's a lot of Adobe-based work, Illustrator, Photoshop, you would probably want people to already have a pretty good working knowledge of those tools. That really helps. So you don't have to train them on those basic things. A good job posting obviously has a clear distinction between these are absolute must-haves and these are, additional nice skills to have. So I think that'd be helpful. If everything is kind of listed on the same level, then maybe one thing to think about is, what is this role? What does the description tell you about the role? And then you can kind of tell which items are the most important. But yeah, I would definitely, if you like the position and you think you're reasonably qualified, I would certainly apply. This is maybe more my personal preference. I prefer talking to people. I find that I get a lot more information from having a conversation with a person. So we might screen out 3 out of 4 candidates just because you get a lot of applicants. They're not even close to meeting any of the requirements. But the ones that do, I prefer to just take a little time and talking to people rather than just going by what they're writing, because to me, the most important skill is communication.
I know that women tend to be particularly impacted by this bias where they feel that they shouldn't apply if they don't meet every single requirement. And the reality is that men are going out there and getting those jobs. So you really need to put yourself out there and stop feeling like every single one of those boxes needs to be checked. What you need is to generally as a whole feel like you could see yourself in that role, and that whatever gaps there are not gaps that you would need 4 years to overcome, right? If they need you to have a degree in neuroscience, that's just not going to work. But if it's maybe learning a tool that you don't know, maybe getting more in depth into a language that you know pretty well, but is not necessarily one of your main languages, these are things that can often make them work. So yes, I would definitely say take it as a guideline, but don't take it too seriously and definitely apply.
I want to share a personal story, which is a real life. It's not very personal, company personal story. A real life example of just that. I think it was back in 2008 or 9. We had an opening for a sandwich year student. Actually, it's not exactly sandwich year, it's sandwich week. Maybe you would call that. It's a type of internship where the student is at school every other week and at work every other week, alternating. We call that alternance. So comes that gentleman, we'll call him Fred, and is applying for that program. Actually, he's applying with us because the way it works is that you need to apply for university once you have a job in hand. So he's applying with us and send a CV and we send a test, and the CV has nothing, nothing. 1 line of experience, not even very remotely related, of language teacher, a couple of years, and that's it. And then we got the test back, and that's the best test ever we had. I think we should have framed it, but we didn't do AA++, whatever you want to call it. So I called the guy and I told him, don't waste your time at school. It's useless. I mean, you have talent, just go for it. Go straight to the freelance position you want, because that's what he wants to do. And we have worked for you. 15 years, we're still working with the guy.